A boy was auctioned off like cattle, his wrists bruised from rope, his eyes colder than the Texas dawn. He was only 14, yet the crowd in Galveston treated him as though he were less than human. A ledger of names and numbers lay open on the podium, and the auctioneer's voice cut through the dust and hunger of the year 1887. $20 to start. Who will take this one? The silence felt heavy, broken only by whispers about drought and famine. No one expected the quiet rancher at the back to lift his hand. Samuel McKinnon, scarred by years of loss, placed the bid. The numbers climbed until he closed it at 50. The warehouse froze. Samuel, the man mocked for being childless, had just bought a boy. The crowd sneered, some muttering that perhaps loneliness had driven him to a dark desire. Samuel's weathered face revealed nothing. He placed his hat back on his head, signed the ledger, and led the boy outside. The boy's name was Jules Sullivan, thin, sharp-eyed. He scanned every door, every exit, every patch of light on the ground, memorizing distances like a soldier. When Samuel introduced himself on the road home, Jules asked bluntly, "Did you buy me for labor or for something else?" The words hung like a blade. Samuel stopped his wagon, turned to face him, and spoke with the weight of truth. "I don't touch children. Any man who does deserves a rope around his neck, myself included." The silence that followed was heavier than any sermon. For Jules, it was the first sign that perhaps this stranger was not the same as the monsters he had known. At the ranch house, Martha McKinnon, Samuel's wife, appeared at the doorway. She was 38, her hair pinned back, but her eyes hollow from years of disappointment. When she saw Jules, she insisted on cleaning him up, drawing a bath, laying out fresh clothes, and offering a room better than any orphan could dream of. Her hands moved with the urgency of a woman who had long forgotten what hope felt like. Samuel watched from the doorway and realized that for the first time in years, Martha had a reason to rise in the morning. Yet Jules was not a child who surrendered to comfort. As he lay in the new bed, he whispered numbers under his breath, recalling every fence post and trail he had seen on the ride in. He noted the men working in the yard, the rifles above the mantel, and the distance from the window to the outer barn. Freedom, if necessary, would be taken, not given. And so the house of McKinnon became more than a shelter. It became a fragile stage where love, suspicion, and survival all took root at once. The drought still raged outside, cattle withered on the prairie, and tongues wagged in town that Samuel McKinnon had bought himself a boy. Yet under that roof, 3 lives had just been bound together by choice and by fear, and none of them knew the storms waiting beyond the horizon. Stories like these remind us that family is not simply inherited, it is forged in choices, in risks, and in the moments when someone says, "I will not harm you, I will protect you." If you believe in the power of chosen family, share this story and subscribe to Heart Story, because what happens next will test every oath and awaken every buried truth. Life at the McKinnon Ranch settled into a rhythm that outsiders could not see. Before dawn, when the prairie was still cloaked in shadow, Jules was already awake. His small hands swept the kitchen, chopped vegetables, or carried water. By mid-morning, he had moved to the garden, the corrals, and the fields, his body working harder than it should at 14, yet his eyes sharp with calculation. He never wasted motion. He noted which mule carried more weight, which patch of ground dried faster, which tool was beginning to fail. When Samuel walked the fences, he found Jules sketching lines in the dirt, estimating the load of grass against the stomachs of cattle, predicting which pasture would burn out first in the drought. Samuel saw in him not just a laborer, but a mind. So at night, when the lamps were lit and the ranch had gone quiet, Samuel opened his small office. He pulled out ledgers of grain, invoices for cattle, and scraps of correspondence with trading posts. He taught Jules letters and numbers, slow at first, then faster, until the boy's hand moved quickly over paper, adding figures with an accuracy that startled him. Jules devoured each lesson as though it were food. To him, the words in columns meant more than arithmetic. They were tools that could one day give him a voice in a world determined to silence him. Hidden beneath his shirt, Jules stitched a strip of colored ribbon into the seam. It was small, rough, and clumsy, but to him it was a lifeline. It reminded him that he was different, that his heart did not follow the path others demanded. He carried it like a prayer, a quiet defiance against a world that would brand him unnatural. He told no one, not Samuel, not Martha. The ribbon was his alone. Martha had begun to fuss over him in ways she had not expected. She trimmed his hair, reminded him of table manners, chose shirts that fit his thin frame. She folded his clothes with a tenderness that surprised even herself, though her hands sometimes trembled. She feared that one day the boy would vanish as suddenly as he had arrived, leaving her with emptiness even heavier than before. One night, as a storm rolled across the plains, the air inside the ranch turned colder still. Jake Winters, a new hand taken on for the season, lingered too long in the kitchen. His smirk carried menace. In the roar of thunder, he cornered Jules, his hand clutching the boy's arm. Fear froze Jules only for a moment. Then instinct took hold. His fingers wrapped around a cast-iron skillet, and he swung with desperate strength. The crash rang louder than the storm itself. Jake staggered back, cursing, his shoulder torn by the blow. Samuel arrived within minutes, pistol already in his hand. He did not hesitate. He ordered Jake out, his voice steady, his eyes steel. "You have 10 minutes to be gone. No bargaining, no second chance." In the rain, Jake disappeared into the darkness. But hatred does not vanish with distance. After that night, Jules became more vigilant. When he walked the property, he noticed the glint of light on the ridge to the east, the unmistakable reflection of glass or steel in the sun. Once, by the creek, he counted hoofprints too many for the ranch hands who belonged there. Someone was watching. He said nothing, but he marked each sign in memory the way he once memorized the exits of the auction house. Still, in the quiet moments between chores and storms, the office remained his refuge. Ledger pages filled with his careful writing. He studied patterns of cost and weight, traced routes from Galveston to Fort Worth, from Kansas City to Chicago, and dreamed of a world where numbers could shield him more powerfully than any weapon. In that house, amid suspicion and tenderness, Jules began to grow. He was still the boy who counted shadows and escape routes. Yet beneath Martha's careful touch and Samuel's stern instruction, he found a strange balance. Protection and vulnerability lived side by side. The ribbon beneath his shirt reminded him of who he truly was, and the books on the desk reminded him of who he could become. Education, Jules realized, was not just about words or numbers. It was a kind of armor, a shield against men like Jake, a ladder beyond the reach of those who would chain him. And perhaps the greatest lesson of all was that knowledge, once learned, could never be taken away. Trust was not something Jules gave easily, yet the weight of secrets became heavier than his thin shoulders could bear. One night, with the lamps flickering low in Samuel's office, he spoke at last. He confessed that before Galveston's auction block had claimed him, he had worked as a runner and a bookkeeper for Garrett Mills, the dockside magnate whose influence stretched from warehouses to judges. Jules carried with him a small black ledger, tucked deep in his satchel, filled with names and bribes, lists of officials bought and paid for. It was his single thread of power, a weapon that had kept him alive. He admitted this not out of fear, but because the eyes watching from the eastern ridge had grown too many, too close. Samuel listened without judgment. Though the knowledge tightened his jaw, he understood what it meant to hold such a ledger, protection for one, danger for all. Jules knew that truth would not remain buried. Before dawn broke, hooves thundered against the hardened ground. 6 riders approached, their silhouettes etched against the pale horizon. At their head rode Jake Winters, the very man cast into the storm, now returned with vengeance. Flanked by men loyal to Mills, their voices tore through the morning chill hand over the boy and the book. The ranch stirred like a struck hive. Samuel stood at the gate with pistol in hand. Tom, the foreman who had served the McKinnons for decades, roused the ranch hands. Rifles braced against windows, doors barred. The household transformed into a fortress. For 20 minutes, the land echoed with gunfire, the clash of bullets against timber, the cry of horses startled by smoke and fear. Jules, pressed against the study wall, felt the vibration of every shot. Yet when a figure slipped through a side window, he did not freeze. He lifted Samuel's spare revolver and pulled the trigger. The intruder fell back, wounded, and the boy's hands shook as though fire itself had passed through him. When the standoff reached its breaking point, Jules made a decision that belied his youth. He stepped out onto the porch, blood staining the cloth wrapped around his palm from a cut he had inflicted himself. The ledger in his grasp, he shouted across the yard. He offered in exchange the book for their retreat. With one condition, they must carry word to Mills that Jules Sullivan was dead. To seal the illusion, he tore a strip from his shirt, soaked it in blood, and left it at the doorway like a grim token. The riders, wary of further loss, accepted the bargain. They gathered the ledger, cursed, and withdrew into the horizon. The ranch stood battered but unbroken. Smoke curled from the fields, windows shattered, fences scarred. The black ledger was gone, yet its shadow remained. In the aftermath, Samuel ordered the ranch fortified. Tom drilled the men in marksmanship. Fences were rebuilt stronger, and night watches were doubled. Martha stitched torn curtains with trembling hands, her eyes darting at every noise beyond the door. And Jules, though alive and free within the walls, knew that secrecy no longer shielded him. His past lay bare on the table, exposed as surely as the broken glass across the floor. But knowledge brought with it a different kind of strength. Jules understood now that survival demanded not only cleverness, but sacrifice. To protect those who had given him shelter, he had surrendered the very proof of his independence. Education had given him the ability to read ledgers, to wield numbers as tools. Experience had now taught him the cost of trust, the price of leadership. Lessons written in books may shape the mind, but lessons written in blood shape the soul. The ranch, though scarred from the raid, began to breathe again. Cattle still needed tending, fields still demanded labor, and the rhythm of survival carried on. Yet within the house, a deeper conversation stirred. Martha, who had watched Jules grow from a wary shadow into a boy who read figures by lamplight and planned grazing routes with startling precision, longed to anchor him fully. She spoke gently to Samuel one evening, her voice carrying the tremor of hope. "Let us make him ours. Give him a name that binds him, a place no one can take away." Samuel, steady as always, weighed her words but answered with care. "We will not turn purchase into parenthood. He must have a choice. We cannot decide for him." It was the first time Jules heard the word choice used in connection with his life, and it unsettled him more than any gunfire. When asked, Jules carried the truth he had hidden deeper than the ledger. He admitted that his heart did not move toward girls, that he felt himself drawn differently. The world he knew branded such truth as a sin, a stain, a reason to be cast out. His eyes avoided theirs, his hands clenched as though preparing for rejection. But Samuel's reply came without pause. "We protect you because you are human, not because you resemble anyone else. That will never change." And Martha, tears pressing against her lashes, folded him into her arms. "You are safe in this house." For Jules, safety had never been more than a fleeting hope. Now it was a spoken vow. With that vow came a vision. The ranch could be more than a business. Under Jules's guidance, it began to open its gates to orphans, to drifters, to boys cast aside as he once had been. They were not taken as servants but as students. Samuel oversaw discipline. Tom taught the handling of cattle, and Martha shaped manners and dignity. Jules took charge of numbers, teaching letters, calculations, and the pride of keeping one's own accounts. The land that had once been known only for drought and cattle now became a refuge for the unwanted. Results followed swiftly. Jules designed feeding schedules that cut waste and mapped new trade routes stretching to Fort Worth. Kansas City, and Chicago. Sales increased, profits climbed by nearly a third, and word spread that the McKinnon Ranch ran with a precision unseen in Texas. Charitable societies began sending children who would otherwise have been lost to the streets. Where others saw mouths to feed, Jules saw hands to train, futures to build. Samuel and Martha, watching, recognized his place was no longer that of a dependent, but of a partner. They named him as heir to the ranch, a decision Jules received not with arrogance but with resolve. He demanded to earn it, to prove through labor and foresight that his worth was more than sentiment. He took charge during drought drills, calculated the digging of new wells, and even stood in negotiations with buyers, his lean figure at the table matching seasoned traders point for point. What had begun as a purchase in a warehouse now stood as a chosen bond, strengthened by honesty and respect. The boy who once counted exit routes in silence now counted cattle, contracts, and the children playing under the cottonwoods. And though the ribbon hidden in his shirt still whispered that he was different, the walls around him whispered louder, "You belong." The education Jules had first treated as armor had grown into something larger. It became a foundation for others to climb, a structure on which dignity and opportunity could be built. He learned, and then he taught. He was given safety, and he multiplied it. True knowledge, he realized, is not hoarded, it is shared, passed on until those once discarded stand tall enough to choose their own lives. The sky over Texas hardened into brass, and the earth split with thirst. Each day the sun scorched deeper, leaving cattle collapsed on plains that once rolled with grass. Wells shrank to mud, rivers retreated to trickles, and whispers of ruin swept through every homestead. For many, the drought was a death sentence. At the McKinnon Ranch, it became the greatest test Jules had ever faced. He rose before dawn and studied the land like a physician at a dying bedside. He led teams into the hills, searching for veins of water hidden beneath rock. When others surrendered to despair, he ordered shafts dug, and within weeks 2 new wells broke the surface, their water lifting hope with every bucket. He calculated which cattle could be sold early, thin but still marketable, sparing the stronger ones to above the herd's heart. He bartered feed with neighbors, trading water for grass, muscle for hay. Soon the ranch was not only surviving but feeding the very community that once doubted it. Families arrived with wagons, offering hands in exchange for survival. The McKinnon Ranch, under the guidance of a boy once sold like property, had become a refuge against annihilation. When the rains at last returned, the ranch stood taller than before. The barns were stocked, the wells secured, and the herd lean but alive. Around the kitchen table, Samuel and Martha placed before Jules a document that carried more weight than any weapon. It was a deed, signed with their hands, naming him co-owner of the land, the cattle, and the future. Not heir and waiting partner in full, Jules accepted, not with triumph, but with solemn understanding that responsibility was no longer borrowed. It was his. Yet another truth waited still. Among the papers Jules had once surrendered to Mills's riders, he had kept a copy of a single page, an entry of private disbursements paired with initials too familiar to ignore. Alongside it lay a chain, the last token of his mother, Jules Sullivan. Driven by questions, Jules traced records back to the church at Brazos. There, in ink faded by time, the baptismal ledger revealed the name of his father, Daniel McKinnon, Samuel's elder brother, lost years ago on a cattle drive. The revelation struck with quiet force. Jules was not only a boy they had chosen, he was kin by blood, a grandson of the same line mocked for dying without legacy. For Samuel and Martha, the knowledge did not alter their bond, it only deepened it. Martha's eyes welled as she whispered, "Whether by blood or by choice, you are ours." Samuel, the man once branded barren of heirs, had in truth been raising his own family all along. Out on the porch, Jules watched the children they had taken in chase one another across the yard, their laughter rising against the evening sky. He reached into his shirt impress the ribbons sewn there, its colors a secret vow to live truthfully. He knew then that family was not first written in bloodlines, nor sealed by paper, but carved in the decisions to protect, to nurture, to believe in one another even when the world would not. And so the ranch stood, not merely as a business, but as a sanctuary where unwanted children grew into men and women with pride in their names. The drought had proven that strength is multiplied when shared, and the revelation had proven that love comes before lineage. Do you believe that family is defined by blood or by the courage to choose each other? Comment. But choose if you believe in chosen family, and subscribe to Heart Stories for more stories that remind us we are never bound only by the past, but by the choices we make to stand together